He was the billionaire every woman wanted, but his heart belonged to only one. Years after losing the love of his life, Preston Brooks built an empire, yet every success felt empty without her. Until one night, under the golden lights of Atlanta, he saw her again, Nova Jackson, the Black Queen he never stopped loving. And this time, he's ready to keep the promise he made. Forever. The rain came down in silver streaks against the dark windows of the Rolls-Royce, each drop melting into the blur of New York's lights. Inside, Preston Brooks sat perfectly still, a man carved out of silence. His reflection in the glass was sharp, but tired, the kind of exhaustion money could never heal. Across from him, his phone buzzed again with notifications from the night's charity gala, his assistant texting congratulations for yet another record-breaking donation. But none of it mattered. He loosened his tie, staring at the skyline that stretched beyond the tinted glass. Manhattan pulsed with energy, the city of ambition, conquest, and everything he had built. Yet every success felt hollow. He'd won the battles his father had set for him, inherited the empire that once loomed like a promise. And still, he carried a void that refused to close. His assistant, a young woman named Claire, glanced back from the front seat. "Sir, about the Charleston project, the Youth Arts Center proposal. They're expecting your final approval." The words cut through the static in his head. Charleston. He straightened slowly. "What did you say?" "The Brooks Foundation expansion, the community arts program for underprivileged kids, the one based in Charleston, South Carolina. I can schedule a site visit if—" But she didn't finish. Preston had already gone quiet, his gaze locked on the raindrops chasing each other down the window. That name, Charleston, carried 1,000 memories buried deep under years of pretending. He turned away, speaking softly, almost to himself. "Schedule it." The rain outside turned heavier, and for the first time in years, his thoughts drifted back to Nova Jackson. 9 years earlier, Charleston, South Carolina. The air smelled of magnolias and sea salt, the kind of southern scent that made memories cling. Nova Jackson balanced a tray of coffee mugs on one hand as she weaved between crowded tables inside the small cafe tucked along King Street. She was 25, graceful, confident, her curls tucked beneath a colorful scarf, her brown skin glowing with the warmth of someone who believed in purpose even when life was hard. That afternoon, a stranger walked in. He looked completely out of place, tall, sharply dressed in a crisp white shirt and navy trousers, his accent pure Manhattan. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking lost, before scanning the room as if searching for something familiar. "You okay, sir?" Nova asked with a polite smile as he approached the counter. He smiled back, awkward but charming. "Yeah, I think so. I was supposed to meet someone for a tour of the old district. I got lost. Twice." "Then you're officially in Charleston," she teased, turning to pour him a coffee. "It's part of the experience." As she handed him the cup, their fingers brushed. Just a second, but enough for her to notice the warmth in his touch and the curiosity in his pale blue eyes. He took a sip and grimaced. "Too strong?" she asked. "Too honest," he said, then laughed. "I like it." She shook her head. "You sound like someone who's never had real coffee before. I'm from New York. We survive on jet fuel." It was the beginning of something neither of them expected. The next morning, Preston came back, and the next, and the next, always ordering the same thing, always sitting by the same window seat, pretending to check his phone but mostly watching her. Nova called him Mr. Suit, teasing him until he finally gave his name, Preston Brooks. He told her he was in town managing one of his father's projects but didn't mention the billions behind his family's name. He liked how she treated him, not as someone powerful but as someone human. In the evenings they would walk by the river, talking about dreams. Nova spoke of starting an art center for Black kids who didn't have access to creative outlets. "I want them to see color in their lives, not just struggle," she'd say. Preston listened, genuinely moved. "I spend my days in boardrooms, Nova. You spend yours building something real. You make me wish I could start over. She smiled, tucking a curl behind her ear. Then start over. You're the one holding the pen. One humid summer night, he invited her to a charity gala his father was hosting at a historic mansion. Nova hesitated, tugging at the hem of her second-hand dress as they stepped into a ballroom full of diamonds and judgment. Every head turned. Whispered questions floated through the air. Who's she? What's he doing with her? Preston noticed her discomfort and tightened his grip on her hand. Let them talk, he whispered. You belong anywhere I do. He meant it. But the night was heavy with tension. She felt the invisible walls of class and race pressing in. Still, she stood tall beside him, radiant in her quiet defiance. Later, outside beneath the gas lamps, he looked at her as though the rest of the world had faded. No matter where life takes us, he said softly, you'll always be my forever. She laughed through tears. That's a dangerous thing to promise, Preston. Then I'll be dangerous. He kissed her. A tender, trembling kiss that tasted like hope. Days turned into weeks. Their love grew real, fragile but fierce, yet shadows gathered quietly around them. Preston's father, Richard Brooks, discovered the relationship through whispers from the Charleston elite. One evening, he summoned his son to the family's rented estate. Preston entered the study to find his father pacing, eyes cold. You're embarrassing yourself, Richard said sharply. And our name. Preston stood his ground. I love her. His father's voice turned into a snarl. She's not one of us, Preston. She doesn't belong in our world. She's the best part of mine. The older man slammed his glass down. If you continue this, you lose everything. Your trust, your inheritance, your future. Preston's hands clenched at his sides. Then I'll build my own future. But as he stormed out, he didn't know Nova had overheard. She'd arrived at the gate, her heart full of excitement to see him, only to freeze when she heard her name, and the venom behind it. She walked away in silence that night, the tears hot on her cheeks. She wrote him one letter, short, trembling, and final, then disappeared before dawn. When Preston woke the next morning and found her gone, panic took over. He searched for her across Charleston, every cafe, every art studio, every friend she'd mentioned. Days bled into weeks. All he found was an empty apartment with paint stains on the floor and a photo of them smiling by the river. He called, wrote, begged the universe for a sign. None came. Eventually, duty dragged him back to New York. His father's health declined, the empire demanded attention, and time became his enemy. But nothing filled the silence she left behind. Present day. The Rolls-Royce glided through the wet streets of Manhattan, the hum of the city muted beneath the rain. Preston leaned back, lost in the blur of lights. His assistant glanced back again. Sir, did you want me to confirm your flight to Charleston? He nodded slowly. Yes. She smiled. I'll arrange it for tomorrow. As she turned away, Preston reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn photograph. Nova standing by the river, her head tilted back in laughter, sunlight catching her skin. He traced the edge of the picture with his thumb, his chest tightening with memory. 9 years. 9 years of pretending he'd moved on. He whispered under his breath, the words barely audible against the rain. I kept my promise, Nova. I never stopped loving you. He closed his eyes, the ache in his heart steady but alive. The kind that tells you love never dies. It only waits. Outside, the storm deepened. The car turned toward the private terminal, and the lights of New York faded into shadow. Tomorrow he would return to the city where forever began, and where it ended. But not for long, because this time he wasn't coming back to remember her. He was going back to find her. The morning sun stretched across Charleston like a painting, golden light, spilling over moss-draped oaks and weathered rooftops. The air was soft, alive with the hum of cicadas and the scent of salt from the nearby harbor. Inside a renovated brick building on the east side of town, Nova Jackson moved from easel to easel, correcting brushstrokes, encouraging laughter, and wiping paint from the cheeks of children who refused to stay clean. The Charleston Creative Arts Center was her dream made real, a sanctuary for kids who needed somewhere safe to dream. Bright murals covered the walls, faces of Black heroes, rivers and skies bursting with color. Every inch of it told a story of community, hope, and resilience. Nova had built it with her own two hands, late nights, fundraisers, and small grants, all while raising Elijah, her 8-year-old son who was currently sprawled on the floor, sketching superheroes with a broken crayon. He looked up as she walked past, his blue-gray eyes gleaming beneath the sunlight. "Mom, can I add wings to him?" he asked, holding up his drawing. She smiled, brushing his curls. "Of course you can. Maybe wings are what make him strong." He grinned, satisfied, and went back to work. Nova's heart warmed, and the kind of quiet joy she found only in motherhood and art. Still, some nights, when the house was silent, she wondered about the part of her story that had been left unfinished, about the man she'd loved and walked away from. She never said his name aloud. Later that afternoon, the city buzzed with anticipation. The mayor's office had announced that a major investor was coming to fund an expansion of Nova's art center, an event that had drawn reporters, city officials, and local artists. Nova had prepared a small speech, her hands trembling as she held the note cards. It wasn't nerves, it was disbelief. Someone out there believed in what she'd built. Someone had seen her work and decided it was worth investing in. The courtyard outside the center filled with guests. Cameras clicked. The mayor stood at the podium, smiling wide. "Today," he said, "we celebrate vision, and the man whose generosity is making this next chapter possible. Please welcome our new partner, Mr. Preston Brooks." The applause swelled and Nova froze. She thought she'd misheard. Her breath caught in her throat. And then he stepped onto the stage. Tall, composed, familiar, in a way that time couldn't erase. His hair was shorter, his jawline stronger, his suit tailored to perfection, but his eyes, those same blue eyes that once looked at her like she was his whole world. He turned toward the crowd, then toward her. Their gazes locked, a collision, of past and present so powerful it stole the air between them. The applause faded. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. After the ceremony, Nova slipped into a side corridor, her chest tightening. She pressed her back to the wall, trying to steady herself. "Nova," his voice, soft, certain, impossibly real, came from behind her. She turned slowly. Preston stood a few feet away, the sunlight from the courtyard catching on the edge of his suit. He looked older, but not distant, just worn by years of searching. "I didn't come here for business," he said quietly. "I came because I never stopped loving you." Her throat tightened. "Love?" She let out a strained laugh. "You don't get to say that after disappearing for 9 years. His brow furrowed. "I didn't disappear, Nova, you did. I spent months looking for you." She looked away, pain flickering in her eyes. "You had a world waiting for you, Preston. I wasn't part of it." He took a hesitant step forward. "You were all of it." Her eyes glistened, but she shook her head. Please don't do this, not here." "Not in front of what I've built." He stopped, hands trembling slightly. "Then let me be part of what you've built." Just once, before she could respond, one of the staff members called for her. The local press wanted photos. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the stone floor, leaving him standing there with 1,000 unsaid words trapped behind his lips. The following days felt surreal. Preston stayed in town, offering help with the center's expansion plans. He donated art supplies, brought in volunteers, and arranged meetings with architects. Every visit drew him closer into her world, and closer to Elijah, who adored him instantly. Preston met the boy on the 3rd day. Elijah was sitting on the floor of the art room, trying to assemble a wooden frame for his painting. "Need a hand?" Preston asked, crouching beside him. Elijah grinned. "I'm building something strong. Mom says strong things last longer." Preston chuckled. "She sounds like a very smart woman." "She is," Elijah said proudly. "She paints like the sky." As they worked together, Preston felt a strange familiarity. The boy's laughter, the way he tilted his head when he thought, and then there were his eyes. The same soft blue-gray that haunted Preston's dreams. He brushed the thought aside, unsure if his heart was playing tricks on him. Nova watched them from the doorway. The sight twisted something inside her. Love and fear tangled together. Preston fit so easily into the space she'd protected for years. And Elijah, her son, looked at him like he'd known him all his life. That night, as she locked up the center, Preston lingered behind. "I didn't expect to find this," he said softly, nodding toward the building. "You've built something beautiful, Nova. It's home," she replied. "For them, and for me." He hesitated, then added, "It could be home for me, too, if you'd let it." She looked at him, her defenses crumbling just a little. "Why now, Preston? Why come back after all this time?" He took a breath. "Because I finally realized what mattered. I built towers and bought islands, but none of it filled the space you left." The honesty in his voice shattered her. She turned away, wiping a tear before he could see it. "You don't know what you're asking for. My life isn't the same. I'm not the girl who waited by the river anymore." He stepped closer, voice low and steady. "Then let me meet the woman she became." For a long moment, silence filled the room, thick with memory and longing. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You hurt me, Preston. Even if it wasn't your fault, it still hurt." "I know," he said, "and I'll spend the rest of my life making it right." She looked up, eyes glistening. "You really think forever waited for you?" He smiled faintly. "I think it waited for both of us." And before she could reply, he kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of impulse, it was a slow, aching reconnection of two souls who'd been broken in the same way. For a second, time folded, and they were back under Charleston's gas lamps, where he'd first promised her forever. When they finally parted, she rested her forehead against his chest, tears slipping free. "Don't make promises you can't keep." He cupped her face gently. "I already did. And I still mean it." Later that night, Preston left the center with a mix of hope and fear running through him. The city lights flickered across the car windshield as he drove back to his hotel, thinking of the woman who'd once been his whole world, and maybe still was. But just as he reached the corner of Meeting Street, a small voice called out behind him. "Hey, Mr. Brooks!" He turned to see Elijah running toward him, holding out a forgotten scarf. The boy's curls bounced in the evening breeze, his smile bright. "You dropped this," Elijah said, handing it over. Preston knelt to his level, smiling. "Thanks, buddy. You're a real gentleman." Elijah looked curious. "Mom says you used to love her. Did you stop?" The question hit like a soft lightning bolt, innocent but sharp. Preston froze, searching the boy's eyes, seeing now what he hadn't let himself see before. The same mix of colors, blue with a hint of gray like the sea before a storm. He swallowed hard, then smiled gently. "No, buddy," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I never did." Elijah grinned and ran back toward the building, shouting goodnight over his shoulder. Preston watched him disappear through the doorway, his heart pounding with realization. He stood there for a long time, the Charleston night wrapping around him, his mind replaying every moment and every word Nova had said. Every glance, every secret she hadn't spoken. Something deep inside him shifted. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. He looked up at the magnolia trees swaying in the warm air, whispering to himself, "Forever, huh? Maybe it never ended after all." And with that thought, he turned toward the shadows, knowing that tomorrow he would face the truth, and that the promise he once made, beneath those same stars, was finally calling him back to be kept. The late evening light stretched across the horizon, painting Manhattan in shades of honey gold and soft blue. Inside Preston's penthouse, everything felt quieter than it ever had. No echo of laughter, no clinking of wineglasses, no trace of Nova's warm hum filling the air as she cooked. The skyline glowed beyond the glass walls, but all Preston could see was the empty chair across from him, the ghost of the woman he never stopped loving. He sat at his grand piano, fingers hovering above the keys. The melody he once wrote for her, their song, was trapped in his chest. It had been months since she'd left for Atlanta, chasing her dream again. And though he'd told her to go, to live fully and freely, the silence she left behind was heavier than any empire he'd ever built. Preston leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "You said you'd come back, Nova," he whispered to the empty room. "I'm still here. I never stopped." Across the miles, Nova Jackson stood in front of a dressing room mirror, the reflection staring back at her, wearing elegance and pride. The benefit gala tonight wasn't just another event. It was the night her art foundation, the Heartwork Project, was being honored for empowering young black girls in creative fields. The dream she and Preston once mapped out together had finally come to life. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the pearl clasp around her neck. The memory of Preston's hands fastening, the same necklace years ago, flickered before her eyes. How he'd kissed her shoulder and whispered, "Forever looks good on you." But forever had been interrupted by fear, by the noise of their worlds colliding, the whispers about the white billionaire and the black woman from Atlanta, the tabloids that tore apart something beautiful. Yet through every success, every new milestone, Nova still felt the weight of his absence, his voice, his touch, the quiet way he looked at her like she was the only real thing in his world. Her assistant, Talia, peeked in through the door. "They're ready for you, Nova. You're up next." Nova smiled softly, but her heart thudded in her chest. "Thanks, Talia. I'll be right there." She picked up her clutch, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, "You've got this." But as she stepped onto the stage under the bright lights of the Atlanta Civic Hall, her gaze drifted over the audience and froze. There he was, Preston Brooks, seated in the front row in a tailored black tuxedo, his piercing blue eyes locked on her as though the crowd, the lights and the world itself had disappeared. For a moment the sound of applause faded. The years between them dissolved. It was just them again, two hearts that had never stopped beating in sync, despite the distance. Nova steadied her voice, forcing herself to begin her speech. "Tonight isn't just about recognition. It's about remembering where we come from, and who believed in us even when the world didn't." Her eyes met his again. Her throat tightened, but she pushed through the ache. Sometimes love shows up in unexpected places, and sometimes it stays even when it has every reason to leave. Preston's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected her to speak directly into his soul, not like that. Not here with hundreds of people watching. But he understood. This was her truth, their truth wrapped in poetry and grace. After the event, Nova slipped away quietly through a side door into the cool night air. The city buzzed faintly around her, the scent of magnolia drifting through the breeze. She stood by the stone railing, gazing at the skyline, her chest tight with emotion. Then she heard it, footsteps. Slow, steady, familiar. "Nova." His voice came softly, filled with both ache and reverence. She turned. For a long moment, neither spoke. Preston looked older somehow, not in years, but in weight, the kind carried by love that refuses to die. "I didn't think you'd come," she whispered. He smiled faintly, stepping closer. "You asked me once what forever means. I figured it's time I showed you." Tears welled in her eyes. "You could have called, written, anything." "I wanted to," he said, voice low, 100 times. "But every message I wrote sounded too small for what I felt. You said you needed space to find yourself again. I didn't want to take that from you." Nova looked down, her fingers trembling against her clutch. "I found what I needed, Preston. But I also realized something." He waited, heart pounding. "No matter how far I go, how much I build, part of me is still yours." The air between them thickened with unsaid words. Preston reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek. "You were never just mine, Nova. You were us. You made me want to be a better man. Not a CEO, not a name on a magazine cover, but someone worthy of your faith." She swallowed hard. "Then why did we let everyone else write our story for us?" His gaze softened. "Because I was too proud. And you were too strong to bend for a man who didn't fight hard enough. But I'm not that man anymore." Nova's breath caught as he took her hand. His touch was the same, warm, grounding, real. The world around them blurred, and all she could hear was the quiet rhythm of his heart beneath his tuxedo jacket. "Preston," she whispered, tears slipping free. "Do you still mean it? What you said years ago? That you'd love me in this life and the next?" He smiled, eyes glistening. "I never stopped meaning it. I never stopped loving you. Every morning I woke up and saw that empty pillow. I promised myself someday I'd find you again, no matter how long it took." Nova's lips quivered as she tried to speak, but before she could, a drop of rain landed on her cheek, then another. Within seconds, a soft drizzle began to fall, the city lights shimmering through the rain. Preston laughed quietly, shaking his head. "Seems like the universe still loves our drama." Nova smiled through her tears. "It always did." He slipped off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She leaned into him, her heart finally exhaling after years of holding its breath. The sound of the rain, the faint hum of the city, and the warmth of his touch wrapped around her like a forgotten melody finding its chorus again. And for the first time in years, Nova realized this wasn't just a reunion. It was a promise kept. The drizzle turned into a soft rain, and Preston guided Nova under the awning of a nearby cafe that was closing for the night. The warm glow from inside spilled out onto the street, casting gold reflections across the wet pavement. For a while, neither spoke. They simply watched the rain fall, each lost in the fragile calm of the moment. Nova held his jacket tighter around her shoulders, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne, cedarwood, and something unmistakably him. It felt like home, but the ache of their years apart still lingered, heavy between every heartbeat. Preston finally broke the silence. "Do you remember the night we talked about the future? You said you wanted to open a place where black girls could paint. Seeing dream without being told they're too loud or too much." Nova's lips curved into a soft smile. "I do, and you said you'd build it with me." He turned to her, eyes glistening. "I didn't forget." From his pocket, he pulled out a small folded envelope, aged at the edges, slightly worn. "I kept this for 5 years," he said quietly, placing it in her hand. "It's the deed to the building I bought in Atlanta. I've been waiting for the right time to give it to you. I had it renovated just the way you described that night. Skylights, open studios, a stage, a community garden in the back. I called it the House of Heartwork for you." Nova blinked, stunned. "Preston, you did this?" He nodded. "You made me believe that love isn't about owning, it's about giving back what you learned through it. You taught me that. You taught me everything." Her eyes blurred with tears. She had imagined his return 1,000 times, but never like this. Never so full, so certain, so quietly beautiful. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why come back after all this time?" He stepped closer, his voice trembling slightly. "Because I realized something, Nova. All my life, I thought love was about building empires, about control and legacy. But the truth is, I never felt more alive than when I was just yours. I came back because my heart never left." Nova's breath hitched. "You don't get to say that after years apart, Preston. You can't just walk in and—" He gently took her hands, cutting her off. "You're right. I can't undo the time I lost. I can't erase the hurt, but I can stand here and love you the way I should have from the start. Openly, without fear, without apology." His voice cracked. "You were never my secret, Nova. You were my heart." Something inside her broke open then. Years of pain, pride, and longing dissolving under the truth of his words. "I missed you every single day," she whispered. "Even when I tried not to." Preston smiled faintly. "Then let's stop trying." He reached into his coat pocket again and pulled out a small velvet box. It wasn't grand or dramatic, just simple, elegant, and real. He opened it, revealing a delicate gold band engraved with a single word: forever. Nova's breath caught in her throat. "Preston." He took a deep breath, voice low and trembling. "I'm not asking you to forget the past. I'm asking you to let me build something new with you. No headlines, no whispers, just us. The promise I made years ago, I meant every word." Tears streamed down Nova's cheeks as she stared at him, the rain whispering softly around them. "You really kept it," she murmured. "The promise." "I did," he said. "Because loving you isn't something I can stop. It's who I am." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she stepped forward, took his face in her hands, and kissed him. It wasn't a desperate kiss, or one born of longing. It was quiet, sure, full of everything they had been through. The rain fell harder, soaking them both, but neither cared. His hands framed her waist. Hers trembled against his jaw, and the world spun softly around them. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "You really are stubborn," she whispered, smiling through her tears. He chuckled, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "You wouldn't love me if I wasn't." They laughed softly, the sound mingling with the rhythm of the rain. Later that night, Preston drove her to the building he had mentioned, restored brick structure nestled between 2 oak trees, lights glowing gently through its glass doors. A bronze plaque beside the entrance read, "The House of Heartwork, founded in honor of the woman who believed that love creates art." Nova covered her mouth, tears streaming silently. "You did all this?" He looked at her tenderly. "No, we did. This was always your dream. I just built the walls, you filled it with soul." Inside, the space was breathtaking. Canvases lined the walls. The air smelled faintly of paint and jasmine, and music played softly from hidden speakers. At the center stood a painting, a portrait of her, smiling, her eyes alive with warmth. She turned to him, overwhelmed. "Preston, how did you even—" He shrugged lightly. "I remember every look you gave me, every smile. I wanted the girls who walk through these doors to see strength when they see you." Nova wiped her tears, laughter breaking through the emotion. "You really did listen all those nights." "Every word," he said. especially when you told me love should build, not break." She walked toward the portrait, touching its frame gently. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "So are you." The silence that followed was warm, peaceful. The years of pain seemed to melt into something softer, healing. As the night deepened, they stood by the window, looking out at the city lights reflecting off the wet streets. Preston turned her toward him once more, his expression steady and full of quiet awe. "Nova Jackson," he said softly, "you were my beginning. You're my forever." She smiled through her tears, the word forever echoing between them like a vow renewed. And for the first time in years, Nova didn't feel the ache of what they'd lost, only the truth of what they'd found again. The world outside moved on, cars passed, lights flickered, but inside that space, time seemed to pause. Two hearts, once broken by distance, had found their rhythm again. And as rain began to fall once more, Nova whispered the words she had once been too afraid to say, words that felt like coming home. "I never stopped loving you either, Preston Brooks. Not for a single day." He kissed her forehead, pulling her close as thunder rolled softly in the distance. "Then forever starts tonight," he murmured. Outside, the city lights glowed brighter, as if the universe itself was keeping watch over two souls who had finally found their way back. Proof that promises kept by love are the ones that never die. Thank you for being part of Whispers of Hope. Your love and support mean more than words. Together we're spreading light, one whisper at a time.